And I may, based on Morgan's, I was kind of trying to get a sense of this, but talk a little bit about working with prescribed burn associations. I know there was some discussion of that this morning. I was on another call, so I may have missed some of that, and I hope I don't inappropriately duplicate this, but a couple things that I was going to think that we should talk about is getting just an understanding of prescribed burn associations and how they relate to what you're hoping to be doing soon. Many of you desire to get fire on the ground in your places. And then get a sense of the role of fire departments and fire suppression agencies. And then I kind of pointed at contingency plans a little bit. And I'll do some adjustments on that because I think this working with groups ahead of time. So the easier topic is prescribed burn associations. I really think that the prescribed burn association is a hugely important link in private lands burning to help the smaller burners who may or may not be able to afford contract services get things done. We were in a focus group meeting several months ago at Big Fine University in College Station, and a question kind of rumbled around, and it was, well, what's the amount of acreage that's worth for somebody to come and burn? And contractors have a pretty good idea. I looked at Brian's website, and he has a flat fee for showing up, so there's a ratio there. And they came around the table to us at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and as we were blessed to assist people with technical guidance, we're not really providing a service, we're teaching them how to do that work. I said, if a landowner came to us and said, I want to burn an acre, well, in the big picture, in that big vision that I think I have, 1 acre wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it's pretty darn significant to that landowner. It means a heck of a lot to that landowner. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I'm down there in University of Houston at Clear Lake, right next to NASA. We burned 1/8 of an acre at their little tiny prairie experimental plot. We did have 20 master naturalists there, and they had a real multiplying effect, but it meant a world to them. And then they posted that on social media. You think that had been the biggest prescribed burn in Texas, but to them it was significant. So that niche in that world between people who've got the capability on their places or who can bring in a certified insured prescribed burner, I think the burn associations really play a significant role. And definition-wise, they're organized, they're cooperatives and they're owner controlled. They work together to share their knowledge, their equipment, and the skills, and then they can actually reduce some risk. Some of them have found a way to better get insured. You heard more about insurance this morning. So I think that there's a real benefit to that group. So the picture here, and I see the PBAs a lot like the days of barn raising. And this is what still has been and still is a great thing about rural America. My neighbors I live in a fairly rural area, and I just have a little piece of ground, but I have neighbors, and I can sort of see where they are, but in a heartbeat, if I needed their help, like when I buried my pickup in my own backyard, good skills there. Bubba, my neighbor, that's really his name, William Thompson, but Bubba was over there in a heartbeat with his son, and they had chains and come-alongs and jacks, and they helped me out without a hesitation. That's what's great about rural America. Well, in the days when people built barns and they couldn't hire Morton Building to put up a big steel barn, they all got together. Not only did the men barn builders get together, but way back in the day, the women barn builders got together, and some people who had skills in cooking and preparing things did that, or maybe they babysitted kids, and the big kids helped the little kids not kill each other, and they built the big old barn. And I see that prescribed burn association as very much like that. Most of us don't have quite enough crew to get everything done on the place. In the day of the burn, you probably need a few more people. So that prescribed burn association can bring to bear, that sort of thing. The other thing that they've done real well is they've gathered up some equipment. You know, not all of us really have 6 drip torches, but each of us has one. So if 6 of us show up, we've taken care of that sort of thing. And in the case of equipment, a lot of times they bring to bear some different equipment, because we're not using this stuff every day, so it may not make sense that we all have one. Somebody brought up communications equipment or radios. A lot of these associations have a little cache of radios. I think there is a handout. I saw it in there. We did a little research and we found some fairly inexpensive radios. Get them on Amazon.com. And I discovered this last year. My son said, our local fire department uses these little old radios. They're $28. I'm like, $28? You could break one of those and not feel too bad. I can promise you I've got some very expensive radios like that are thousands of dollars. You don't want to break those. So those are good things. Also, the handout also speaks about there are about 4 or 5 frequencies that are called MERS frequencies, and you're allowed to use them. You don't have to have a license. 2 of them Walmart uses. Why the richest company in the world needs their own is using free frequencies is beyond me. So if you're burning next to Walmart, you may not be able to use some of their frequencies or those frequencies. You might interfere with a cleanup on aisle 4. So moving along, the PBAs are a great way of neighbors helping neighbors. There's some reduction in cost. You're sharing risk because some more experienced folks are there to kind of help you through things, and you know, kind of they've done it before and that sort of thing. There's definitely community support and just good ability. Many areas they begin to get good conditions for burning. They've got their fire control lines or their fire breaks or fire guards in, and they're going to go, you know, we're going to start with the Smith Ranch. We're going to start working west, or make a big circle or something like that. And they spend a good week helping each other out and achieve an awful lot. I think they also develop some great friendships and camaraderie in that whole thing, getting fire on the ground. So that's one of the key factors I see in those PBAs, that sort of thing. There's a lot of resources. We have Texas Prescribed Burn Alliance here in Texas. They sort of channel information and energy. I believe that there's a paper, it was kind of a good little paper. I got a link and you've got that in your book there that talks about that. AgriLife has some good information. And Oklahoma has done quite a bit with PBAs. They've got a little different structure. I think that if you read about it, it's just a little different liability structure, and it's helped them out a little bit. They may be able to carry some things, but they've done some good things. And I think a lot more good can be done with them. You know, if you look at the model of what Texas Parks and Wildlife is doing and how we see the PBA as helpful, is that our biologists might assist a small landowner or a large landowner with their initial work. And I had one biologist, yeah, I've been out there burning with this family for 5 years. And I said, I think you've been out there burning about 3 years too many. We really need to wean those folks, get them either on their own or get them with a group of neighbors. And I made an effort in my first year of my job to get around to as many private land burns as I could. And as we finish the burn, one of the things we always do is we have an after-action review. We sit around and have a cold drink of water. Maybe we're even doing it. Some people are, you know, chomping on that good chicken sandwich that they got. And we ask questions about how things went with the idea of how we would do better next time. But a question I bring up, or a common thread that I hear if I don't bring the question up, is I'll hear this new landowner, maybe his neighbor they invited, said, man, it took me a little while to get up the nerve to kind of want to do this, because you know I was a little nervous about it. And a few of you at lunchtime told me that there was a little nervousness in your family, and I think that's realistic. I would say a healthy respect is good, because that dragon, that fire, is not a perfect science, and it's not a perfect art, that sort of thing. But so I was nervous about this, but now I see it's within reach. I think I can do this. I can team up, and I'll say, do you think in a year or so, you know, you can kick us loose, you know, and do it yourself? And like one guy said, yeah, as long as my ranch manager doesn't quit, or or, you know, as long as my good neighbors come. So almost at the time, we were over in Coleman, that's not far from here, those guys were almost forming a very informal burn association. You know, it may not have had all the incorporations, and there's a lot of steps to that. You can read about those. But they were saying, me and my neighbors, we get along, because Bubba would come and pull me out of the mud if I needed him. So maybe Bubba would come and help. In fact, actually, Bubba and I want to burn his place together and work together on that. And so that's almost the concept of just neighbors helping neighbors. There are more formal things, and there may be some additional protections. So I would encourage you to unite with some of your neighbors, to partner up with your friends and neighbors. Some of these associations span multiple counties. Some of them even overlap in states, because, you know, fire doesn't recognize any political boundaries. It's a great equalizer. It burn rich people's land and poor people's land, and doesn't care which football team you like or anything like that. So I think the PBAs are pretty darn useful. Texas Parks and Wildlife, with the National Wild Turkey Federation several years ago, got about a half dozen trailers full of stuff to burn. They ordered that up, and they held on them for a while. And what they wanted to do, and I still think I have one or two sitting around, we want them to go to burn associations. We don't want to own a bunch of stuff. Good grief, the game wardens have more leftover stuff than I don't know what to do with, and that sort of thing. But we want that stuff to get in the hands of people who use them. So, and we would work on helping people get grants and assistance for these PBAs, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, the PBAs end up being a not-for-profit, so they can share certain benefits for that and receive different kinds of assistance and that sort of thing. So that's a little bit about that. I'm not an expert on PBAs, but I'm certainly an admirer of them. How many of you might be part of one? Anybody in here part of one? Excellent. Thank you for doing that, because I think they're a very effective tool. There's some challenges, and I was thinking, at lunchtime we were talking about it, and when I was at college, I did not take all those really good sociology and psychology classes. In fact, I probably teased about them people on that side of campus. Now I wish I'd paid a little more attention, because really, as we talk about rekindling the burn culture in Texas, if that's a fair word, I think now it's a matter of public attitude, and it's more a matter of sociology than just purely science. We have a lot of people that have some very, very different perceptions of burns. A lot of things are based on ignorance and misunderstanding. We'll go full circle back to University of Houston at Clear Lake. I didn't even know where the place was. Ends up that this nice little lady who ran the place wanted to burn, so she calls up the fire department there. It happens to be called the Pasadena Fire Department. It is still a volunteer fire department in that Houston Metroplex. And she says, well, I'd like to do this little burn. And the chief said, and I think I'm accurately quoting this, not just no ma'am, but hell no, not in my city. And she was shocked. Well, then she found out we could help, and we worked with their safety guy, and we presented a burn plan. And when the fire chief looked at this burn plan, he says, well, this looks a little more thought out. Maybe we can work this out. So we did do that, and it might have been overkill. We might have parked a great big silver fire truck down there and had a little bit more stuff just to keep everybody's mind at ease. But we changed, at least we think we changed the perception of one fire chief, that sort of thing. So that's kind of a good thing. So does anybody have a particular question about PBAs? Who's ready to go join one or form one up? A lot of challenges there, because sometimes people get tired. It's obviously not a paying proposition. People rust out and burn out, but I think there's some very positives from that. So I mentioned fire chiefs, and I think I saw at lunchtime, there are a few people who are, oh, you got a question way back there?
Yeah, if somebody's interested in joining a PBA here, how would they go about doing that?
First, I'd try to find out if you were interested. I'll rephrase that so people hear it. If someone was interested in joining a PBA, I would probably go to the Texas Prescribed Burn Alliance, or Alliance for Prescribed Burn. I'm sorry if I don't always say that right. Let me go backwards here. So that's the Prescribed Burn Alliance of Texas. Boy, I have enough acronyms I could really do well. And they've got a listing of what they believe are the currently active burn associations. It looks to me like there's at least 10 to a dozen. And I'd probably try to track those folks down. they talk about which counties they work in or whatever. I don't know if they can expand or contract, but I try to run those down and see if you can hitch your wagon to them. I don't think they're very exclusive. I think they're very open, very supportive folks, and they're probably always happy for a few additional members. As people get older and younger, there's a need to get that sort of thing. Did that help? Thank you. Good point. That's a good one. Any other things on PBAs? So I did notice at lunch there's some folks that have T-shirts on that would make me think that they're part of a fire district. Anybody, those people? Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for your service. In my youth, I was involved with a rural fire district in my small community when I was a first an ag teacher. And I gained a huge respect for the diversity of what a rural fire district has to do. As a wildland firefighter, I've got wildland fire suppression and I've got prescribed fire. But those folks have those things: house fires, car wrecks on the highway, hazardous materials, and cats in trees, and then anything the police department doesn't want to mess with, they call the fire department for. It's an amazing, giant conglomeration of things that they have to be good at, that are somewhat rare events. And if I get it right, they might actually get a steak dinner once a year in their community and probably have spent a lot of their own money to respond, given up revenue where they work. Some people have even had challenges at jobs. I am personally grateful for the rural fire districts, the volunteer fire districts, and no doubt the paid folks. They do a fabulous job, and we need to do that. So that said, I think it's important to think about working with fire departments and suppression agencies. So I'm all of 21 years old, and I'd fought fire for one whole summer, and I have this job as a ranch manager just south of Sun Valley, Idaho. I'm running a little place for a wealthy doctor, and we'd torn out a whole bunch of sagebrush on the ranch, and we're going to put it into barley. We're going to grow barley for Coors, and there's all these windrows of sagebrush. So I'm pretty smart. I'm a firefighter. I figure out Sunday morning, I go ahead and I'm going to light this fire and burn up all these windrows and do some good. And Brian talked about in the morning that relative humidity was pretty low, so my fire and my fire effect, my flame lengths and all were pretty docile. And I didn't actually go get a weather forecast. It looked like a good day. And by just a little after lunchtime, my docile windrows burning were now violently burning and jumping from windrow to windrow, and now jumped out of the pasture, or what was going to be a wheat field, and decided to burn up the Union Pacific drift fence. They take a dim view of that, by the way, and then decided to hop over the railroad grade and start to burn the neighbor's place. It is a good thing that the Bellevue Fire Department plays softball on Sunday right after church, because it means they can respond more rapidly because they're all together. Granted, they've got their softball costumes on underneath their fire costumes, but it was really good. So several hours later, several fence posts and a drift fence from the Union Pacific and a couple cases of beer, because that's the best I could do to pay them back. My fire was out. My neighbor wasn't too upset about the 5 or 6 corner posts that I burned up, and I had learned a lot more than I might have learned in a class about prescribed burning. I learned there was a lot I didn't know. But I tell that story to talk about that our fire departments are important elements of our burning. And there's a mixed bag of response, just as we talked about socially. Some fire chiefs are going to say, hell no, not in my district. And others are going to want to participate to the degree that they can. The most important thing, I think, and I'm going to lead into this, is that in our planning of the burn, or our plan for managing fire on our ranches and farms, that it may be worthwhile to engage the fire department and the suppression agency ahead of time. So if I know I'm planning to burn, not only am I going to actually call the dispatch center, the day of or before the burn to say that, I may go ahead and try to make direct contact with the fire chief and let them know, this is my plan. This is what I've got in mind. I'm thinking this out. I actually have a burn plan. This is what I'm going to do. But after I do everything I can, something can still happen, and I may call you. Or would you be willing to come and participate? I can't tell you how many cookies and bake sales rural fire districts have put on that, you know, they've made a piddly $200, you know, down in front of the country store or whatever. And I was sitting in a meeting and some NRCS people brought up that some places they're able to ask the fire department to come out and they give them about as much money as they make in that cookie and bake sale to bring one of their pieces of equipment out there, stand by, help out and participate. What a cool world. They face the same insurance and other challenges, so that doesn't happen universally, but it's sure worth a try to have a discussion. So just a little thing about talking to them ahead of time. So it wouldn't suffice not to tell you that in Texas there are certain responsibilities. So this is straight out of the, see, what do they call that? The Texas Fire Response Plan that Texas Forest Service developed. And it says local fire departments are the first responders to wildland fires. However, if they're the first line of defense, and if they determine their capacity for control has been exceeded, they'll ask for assistance from Texas Forest Service, TFS, and this may occur quickly or over time as the fire has grown larger and larger. So that begs the next question. So there's Texas A&M Forest Service. So Texas A&M Forest Service plays a role, TFS plays a role, and it's a tiered approach. Though the local fire departments in the counties are the first responders, eventually Texas Forest Service comes in. And by state law, and I've listed those on the next page, I think, Texas Forest Service is the lead agency in wildfire response. As they exhaust their resources and other state agencies' resources are exhausted, they may bring to bear other groups and organizations. So just as much as I suggest that you embrace the local fire department and keep them informed, maybe even get them to pitch in, I would probably, if you're in an environment where Texas Forest Service needs to be informed, which according to the state laws is a place where there's timber. I'm not sure how much timber we have here in this part of Texas, but some places have that. But keeping them informed does not hurt. Once again, we don't need them coming hauling down or dropping the blade where we don't need it to be. Also, you know, they might be interested in knowing. Occasionally, maybe they might be interested in participating or providing some thoughts, giving you some information on weather or conditions or the lack of contingency resources or extra help around the area. Maybe they'll let you know, well, everybody's up in the panhandle, bad fires, burning up people's houses and all that. So if there's a fire, we ain't going to be here. Maybe you shouldn't light it. You know, there's no help. Texas Forest Service, unfortunately, at the moment is not really applying prescribed fire to the land. They are, however, providing pass-through dollars, federal funds, to assist for some landowners to get prescribed fire on the land. It is more focused on interface areas in East Texas that are proximal to some of the national forests and in specific watersheds. But it wouldn't hurt to ask what they're interested in doing or willing to do. There's some hints that they're getting interested in returning to prescribed fire, I think mainly because it's a very, very positive thing. They could wear a white hat by doing that. So some places they've actually started to get an interest. On a local level, some of their district and area foresters are somewhat supportive of that. So making sure that those departments know ahead of time if they could be incorporated into your burning, that wouldn't be bad. They were willing to have people participate. It could be considered a learning experience. There's a current piece of legislation that actually passed, which is really interesting, and I can't quote it verbatim, but what it says is that burning piles of vegetation will require the presence of a member of a volunteer fire department. This is going to be real interesting. Who's in a volunteer fire department? Okay, so you don't get paid most of the time to go out to a real fire. And it's Saturday afternoon, you're going to come over to my house and sit and watch me burn. Is that the way you want to spend your Saturday? I better have a chicken dinner for you, right? Yeah. If it does, if the law has the effect to empower them and let their insurance allow them to be out there, that could be good. But it's a weird law, it's really mysterious to me, and I don't know how it's going to play out, that sort of thing. But it did pass the legislature, so that's a little bit different, that sort of thing. So, okay.
So you're talking about this passed in
This legislature, yes, so as of September, because I don't think it got enough of a vote. So in September, when you, and I don't know if that means if it's burning vegetation in a pile is the way it was discussed, but if someone interprets it to say you're burning vegetation, that would disturb me that they have to show up. But just even to show up for a stinking pile of brush would, to me, be an undue burden upon the rural fire district. It's kind of sad, and I think that one drove right by the rural fire districts. Anybody, did any of your rural fire districts hear that? Never heard that. I did. I never in a million years thought I would be reviewing legislation, and now it surprises you. It doesn't surprise me why legislation is so poor.
Well, sure, the SFFMA would have known about it. You know, they have a big lobbyist there.
Yeah, they might have spoke up. Huh?
They haven't said anything about that. There's no, I hadn't seen a bill on it either, so I don't know what he's talking about. Yeah, it probably wasn't right.
Yeah, and I may have it on my laptop if you'd like to look at it. I think it's just not going to be too good. So keeping those rural fire districts informed is not a bad idea. I don't think most of them want to disturb you. They just want to make sure that they know where the prescribed fire is. So this led me to something called contingency planning. We talked about that in burn planning. And, you know, a contingency plan is a plan of action if the fire escapes. So sometimes you're going to see the fire hop over. Okay, beautiful. You know, you might get a spot fire outside your control lines. 90%, probably 99% of the time, you're going to be able to pick that up with your holding forces and stuff like that. But if you can't keep it there, you need to identify what you've got on board, what you've got there to keep the fire in the box. That's my objective too, is to keep the fire in the box. The fire effects are important too, but that sort of thing. So do I have adequate people? Although it's good to have a minimalist attitude, if you're burning on the high end of your prescription, stronger winds and things like that, sometimes you may want to stack the deck in your favor and have a few more folks to do that. You know, the real big deal in wildland fire suppression, if we talk that, is all fires are the same when they start. They all start as small fires, and it just happens that the fire is just faster than the firefighters are there. You know, firefighters have a capability and their tools of producing or suppressing fire, but the fire is very capable too. So sometimes when we're burning under a little bit more dire conditions, we're definitely going to have more people there for that purpose. But if that fire exceeds your capability, the thing to be mindful of is to have a trigger point and to say, I cannot allow my fire to leave my property. I can let it go into other areas, but I've got to stop it because my neighbors are not probably likely to accept my fire. They may not feel good about that. And so you need to make sure you've got a line in the sand drawn, and then be willing and ready to call those resources, calling them in a timely fashion, because you know it takes time to get out to some rural areas, and not being hesitant to call them if you have to do that. So having a trigger point, honoring the trigger point, calling early if need be, and making sure ahead of time they know where you're at. When you get the fire districts out there to help you, it would be good if you entered into a form of unified command. And what that is where the two authorities, because you have some authority on your land, when it comes to fire, although the state law is a little bit funny. I think it's funny or whatnot. And the concept of unified command is you'd work together, you have a presence, you have an authority with your people, because your people could already be doing some things, and why not incorporate them if they can be safely? And then unified command requires a presence, that you and the local fire chief or leader is there, and that you're able to communicate. You may have great communications with your people as he would have with his. So I see that as sometimes joined at the arms next to each other to support dealing with the prescribed fire at that time. And you may have knowledge of other unique fire breaks and places that they may not know about that you could stop a fire. We've had some really great questions about fighting fire with fire, and I think I might try to answer your question. The idea of using fire, or prescribed fire, to stop a wildfire is probably a pretty darn good idea. So I worked in California for a few years of my career, and every day they'd go out and they'd try to stop a fire before it got to a subdivision. And remember, the fire just sees those houses as fuel model 14, single family dwellings, and it burned those dwellings up. And it doesn't sound like a great idea, but actually doing a burnout in that subdivision and sending your controlled fire into that uncontrolled fire probably would be the better technique. But most fire leaders and fire chiefs are going to be very, very nervous about actually doing that, because the public's not going to accept that I'm burning out your backyard. They want us to stop the fire. As wildland firefighters, when we're in a defensive mode, when we're in this mode that we're standing by and we're going to make a stand, we're not playing offense. And no football team wins the game just simply playing defense. So, little fire theory there. It's a tough call. There's some resources about the laws in the state of Texas. Educational Code 88 says what the responsibilities are. And then there's also some information about the National Incident Management Plan. Understanding how the incident command system works could help when you're integrating with the fire department. Questions on working with fire departments? Good. I hope you can embrace those folks. They bring a lot to the table, and I'm glad we've got a few people from rural fire districts here today.